Imagine a hazy summer day in Long Beach, California, where the air smells of salt, sunscreen, and rebellion. It's the late 1980s, and a skinny kid with a tangle of hair and a guitar slung low is tearing through a backyard gig, his voice a mix of gravel and honey, spitting lyrics that hit like a punch and soothe like a breeze. This is Bradley Nowell, the beating heart of Sublime, a band that would take the raw edge of punk, the soulful sway of reggae, and the dark truths of California's coast and turn them into anthems. But before he was a legend, he was just Brad, a kid with music in his veins and a fire in his chest, chasing a sound that would change everything. Bradley came into the world on February 22, 1968, in Long Beach, a city where palm trees and pawn shops coexist, where the beachfront glistens but the alleys hide secrets. His family was musical to the core. His dad, Jim, was a home builder who moonlighted as a guitar-slinging troubadour, charming partygoers with Jim Croce covers that made the room feel like a campfire sing-along. His mom, Nancy, was a piano teacher, her fingers dancing across keys with a grace that could tame even the rowdiest student. Bradley was their prodigy, soaking up their talent like a sponge. By the time he was old enough to hold a guitar, they were guiding his hands, teaching him chords. While he fidgeted, his mind already racing toward something bigger. But home wasn't all melodies and harmony. When Bradley was 10, his parents' marriage unraveled, splitting his world in two. His mom took custody, and life with her was tough for a kid like Bradley. She called him needy, a boy whose energy overflowed, who couldn't sit still in class, whose grades sank as his thoughts spun. Diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, he was a square peg in the round hole of school, disruptive and restless, his potential buried under frustration. Teachers didn't know what to do with him, and neither did his mom. By 11, he moved in with his dad, a shift that would change everything. Jim Nowell wasn't your typical dad. Instead of grounding Bradley in routine, he threw him into adventure, taking him on a sailing trip around the U.S. Virgin Islands. Picture a scrappy kid barefoot on a boat, the Caribbean sun burning his shoulders, and Bob Marley's voice crackling through a tinny radio. That moment was a lightning strike. Reggae, with its rebel heart and laid-back groove, spoke to Bradley in a way nothing else had. It wasn't just music, it was a philosophy, a way to channel his chaos into something soulful. He returned to Long Beach transformed, Marley's rhythms echoing in his head, ready to make his mark. As a teenager, Bradley dove into the punk scene, a perfect outlet for his restless energy. Long Beach in the early 80s was a breeding ground for gritty DIY bands, and Bradley was right at home in sweaty garages and dive bars. He linked up with Eric Wilson, a bassist with a knack for locking into a groove, and the two started jamming, blending punk's raw fury with Bradley's newfound love for reggae. Eric would later chuckle, admitting their early reggae attempts were garbage, like kids trying to mimic a sound they didn't fully grasp. But Bradley was relentless, pushing through the clunky chords, determined to fuse the two worlds into something new. School? That was a side note. Bradley tried college, first at UC Santa Cruz, then Cal State Long Beach for finance, but his heart wasn't in it. With one semester left, he dropped out, trading textbooks for guitar picks. His real education was happening in Long Beach, where he reconnected with Eric and met Bud Gaw, a drummer whose jazz-trained father had taught him to make the kit sing. In 1988, the trio became Sublime, a name that promised something higher, something that could lift you out of the grind and into the sublime. And oh, did they deliver. These backyard bashes were the lifeblood of Sublime's early days. Word spread like wildfire. If Sublime was playing, you showed up. Hundreds would pack into empty lots, abandoned warehouses, or grimy dive bars with sticky floors and neon signs flickering Budweiser. The crowd was a melting pot of SoCal subcultures. Kids who live for the next wave, the next ramp, the next riff. They'd pile in shoulder to shoulder, passing around 40-ounce bottles wrapped in paper bags, shouting along to songs that hadn't even been recorded yet. Sublime could pull in $250 a night, decent cash for a scrappy band, but the money was never the point. It was about the chaos, the connection, the way Bradley's lyrics could make you feel seen, like he was singing your own restless heart back to you. These weren't polished concerts with VIP sections and security barriers. Sublime's gigs were raw, unpredictable, and sometimes straight up dangerous. Gang members from Long Beach's tougher corners would roll through, their presence adding an edge of tension. Fights would erupt in the crowd, fists flying over a spilled drink or a stray elbow, and the air would crackle with the threat of something bigger. To keep things from spiraling, the band hired Samoan bouncers, hulking figures who stood like sentinels, their calm presence enough to deter all but the drunkest troublemakers. Overhead police helicopters often circled, their spotlights slicing through the night, ready to shut down the party for violating noise curfews. The chopper blades became a kind of soundtrack, a reminder that Sublime's world was one step from the edge. Bradley thrived in that madness. On stage, he was a force of nature. His energy contagious, his stage presence like a lightning bolt wrapped in a flannel shirt. He'd leap into the crowd, sweat-soaked and grinning, or lean into the mic with a howl that could shake the walls. His lyrics were like a knife through the haze, sharp, honest, and unapologetic. Whether he was channeling the laid-back groove of reggae or the frenetic snarl of punk, Bradley had a way of making every word feel personal, like he was telling you a secret about the world you both lived in. Fans didn't just listen, they hung on every note, every riff, every story. He spun about love, loss, and the gritty beauty of California's underbelly. And then there was Louie, the Dalmatian who became Sublime's unofficial fourth member. Bradley rescued him in 1990, spotting the black and white pup in a Long Beach alley. Skinny and skittish, but full of spirit. He named him Louie at first, but it quickly morphed into Lou Dog, a nod to Bradley's grandfather. Lou Dog wasn't just a pet, he was a symbol, a road warrior, a furry extension of Bradley's own wild soul. With his floppy ears and boundless energy, Lou Dog was a constant in Sublime's chaotic world. On tour, he'd sprawl across the van's seats, his head lolling out the window, tongue flapping in the breeze. At shows, he'd bound onto stage, barking along with Bradley's howls, his spotted coat gleaming under the lights. Fans went wild for him, chanting, "Lou Dog! Lou Dog!" as if he were part of the set list. Bradley saw himself in the dog, loyal to a fault, fiercely independent, and unafraid to run headlong into the fray. Lou Dog was more than a mascot. He was family, a tether to something real amid the whirlwind of Sublime's rise. That rise was anything but conventional. Sublime was DIY to the bone, built on sweat, hustle, and a stubborn refusal to play by the music industry's rules. Their manager, Michael Miguel Happold, was a Long Beach local with a knack for making things happen. He scored them free studio time at a local spot, a lifeline for a band scraping by on gig money and dreams. In 1991, they recorded a demo called "Jaw Won't Pay the Bills," a rough-around-the-edges collection of tracks that captured their raw energy. It wasn't polished, but it was promising, a glimpse of the sound that would define them: punk's fury, reggae's soul, and a California swagger all their own. With a $1,000 loan from Bradley's dad, Jim, they took the next step. No major labels, no big budget producers, just Sublime, a makeshift studio, and a vision. They poured everything into their debut album, 40 Ounces to Freedom, released in 1992 on their own label, Skunk Records. The process was pure grit, late nights, borrowed gear, and a stubborn belief that they could do it themselves. The album was unfiltered Sublime. Songs like Bad Fish and Smoke Two Joints, blending laid-back vibes with a rebellious edge. They pressed the CDs and hit the road, selling 30,000 copies out of the back of their van. Every sale was a victory. Every disc handed to a fan at a show or a record store, a defiant middle finger to the industry gatekeepers who hadn't given them a second glance. Sublime wasn't just building a fan base, they were building a movement, one 40-ounce at a time. By 1994, they were ready to push further. Their second album, Robin the Hood, was a sonic leap recorded in a crumbling Long Beach house that felt like it might collapse under the weight of their ambition. The place was a wreck, cracked walls, exposed wires, and electricity they'd pirated from a neighbor's line. It was the kind of setup that screamed Sublime, chaotic, resourceful, and fearless. The album was a patchwork of sounds, raw, experimental, and unafraid to take risks. Tracks like STP and Boss DJ showed Bradley's growing confidence as a songwriter, his ability to weave stories that were both personal and universal. One standout was a duet with a then unknown Gwen Stefani, her voice intertwining with Bradley's in a way that crackled with chemistry, hinting at the stardom both would achieve. Robin the Hood was darker and weirder than their debut, a reflection of Bradley's restless creativity and the shadows starting to creep into his life. Those shadows were impossible to ignore. Bradley's lyrics had always carried a weight, peeling back the sunny myth of California to reveal its underbelly, boardwalks littered with broken dreams, street corners where deals went down, lives unraveling in the haze of addiction and desperation. Songs like Waiting for Myruka and Don't Push painted a world that was equal parts paradise and peril, a place where the party never stopped, but neither did the pain. Bradley had sworn off hard drugs in his early days, wary of their pull after seeing friends get sucked under. But the pressure of being Sublime's frontman, the guy expected to deliver hit after hit, to keep the party going night after night, started to wear him down. He was curious too, chasing the creative spark he thought drugs might ignite. Peers said he believed he could control it, that he could dip into the darkness for inspiration and walk away unscathed. But like so many rock and roll stories, that belief was a lie, he told himself. By 1993, addiction had its claws in Bradley, and he didn't try to hide it. His song Pool Shark was a gut punch, a raw, haunting confession of a man staring down his own mortality. Lines like, "One day I'm gonna lose the war," weren't just lyrics. They were a cry from someone who saw the end coming but couldn't stop. Live shows, once the heart of Sublime's magic, started to fray at the edges. Bradley would take the stage, his eyes glassy, his words slurring, sometimes unable to finish a song or a set. Fans still cheered, caught up in the energy, but those close to him saw the cracks. Rumors of overdoses began to circulate, whispered among roadies and locals who'd seen him disappear into back rooms or alleyways. On tour, his habit got so bad, he'd pawn the band's gear, amps, guitars, anything he could carry to score a hit. Miguel became a one-man recovery team, tracking down the equipment before shows, piecing together the chaos so Sublime could keep playing. The third album was supposed to be their big break, the one that would catapult them from underground heroes to household names. MCA, a major label, signed them in 1994, and they headed to Willie Nelson's Pedernales studio in Texas, a legendary spot that had hosted icons. But from the jump, it was a train wreck. Bradley would vanish into the bathroom for hours, high and unreachable, leaving the band and producers waiting. The sessions were a blur of excess, Sublime rolling in drunk at dawn, their hard partying spilling into every track. Dog, ever present, added to the mess, his paws scratching up the studio's polished floors. At one point, a towel left on a light bulb caught fire, nearly torching the place. The band trashed their rented condos so thoroughly, broken furniture, spilled liquor, walls scuffed and scarred, that they were relocated multiple times. Each move a fresh start, they promptly wrecked. Bradley had been in and out of rehab at least 10 times, and MCA shelled out 6 figures to get him clean, but addiction doesn't care about money, contracts, or second chances. Yet, even in the wreckage, Sublime's talent shone through. By early 1995, they were breaking through in a big way. LA's influential radio station K-Rock picked up Date Expletive, a 3-year-old track from 40 Oz, to freedom that tackled prison justice with unapologetic grit. Its raw edge and provocative lyrics struck a chord, and listeners couldn't get enough, requesting it nonstop. Bradley shrugged off the controversy, insisting there was no great message, just the truth, unfiltered and unapologetic. The song's success was a slow-burn triumph, pushing 40 ounces onto the SoundScan alternative rock charts for an astonishing 70 weeks. MCA doubled down, locking Sublime in for a major label debut. Despite their antics, like printing 300 extra backstage passes for a K-Rock festival, turning the event into a chaotic free-for-all, they were on the cusp of stardom, their name buzzing from coast to coast. On the personal front, Bradley's life was shifting. His girlfriend, Troy, gave birth to their son, Jacob, in 1995. Fatherhood seemed to ground him, at least for a while. He cleaned up, his eyes clearer, his energy focused. He and Troy married on May 18th, 1996, in a Las Vegas ceremony that felt like a new beginning. Friends held their breath, hoping this was it, the moment Bradley would outrun his demons. He was under immense pressure to deliver for MCA, and early recording sessions were tense, his creative process warped by addiction. He'd freestyle gibberish, leaving his producer and bandmates to piece it into songs. But when he was on, he was untouchable, his voice and vision carrying the band to new heights. Tragically, hope can be a cruel mirage. Days after the wedding, Sublime hit the road for a short West Coast tour. Bradley relapsed, the pull of the high too strong. On May 25, 1996, he called Troy from a motel room in San Francisco. She could hear the party in his voice, laughter, music, the clink of bottles, but didn't know it was their last conversation. That morning, he tried to rally his bandmates for a beach trip, but they were too hungover to budge. Alone in his room, he reached for his stash. Hours later, Bud Gaw woke to a nightmare. Bradley on the floor, unresponsive, Dog whimpering on the bed. Paramedics arrived, but it was too late. Bradley Nowell, just 28, was gone, leaving behind a wife, a son not yet won, and a band poised for greatness. The loss hit like a tidal wave. Troy was shattered, her anger mixing with disbelief, the surreal pain echoing her grief when Blind Melon's Shannon Hoon overdosed months earlier. Bud carried a heavy guilt, wondering if he could have saved his friend, even thinking, that was probably supposed to be me. MCA nearly shelved the third album, unsure if it could stand without Bradley. But in late July 1996, they released Sublime, and it was a phenomenon. Selling over 6 million copies, it launched 4 singles: Santeria, Wrong Way, What I Got, and Doin' Time. That became rock radio staples, their hooks and heart embedding them in the cultural zeitgeist. Sublime wasn't just a band anymore. They were a legacy. The music industry faced a reckoning. Troy spoke out. slamming labels for rushing artists back on tour post-rehab, prioritizing profits over lives. She'd seen the cycle: rehab, relapse, repeat, and knew Bradley's story wasn't unique. Bud and Eric, devastated, rejected MCA's suggestion to find a new singer. Bradley was Sublime's soul. Replacing him was unthinkable. They moved on to other projects, carrying his memory but unable to fill the void. Lou Dog stayed with Miguel, living until 2001, when his ashes were scattered in the same spot as Bradley's, a final nod to their bond. Troy rebuilt her life, remarrying and raising Jacob, who grew up with his father's music as both a gift and a shadow. Now in his 20s, Jacob fronts his own Long Beach band, LAW, channeling Bradley's spirit with his own voice. Sublime's music endures, the soundtrack to countless summers, road trips, and late-night confessions. Songs like Bad Fish and Caress Me Down capture the joy and pain of Bradley's world, inviting listeners into his highs and lows. Bradley Nowell's life was a tightrope walk between brilliance and destruction. He gave us Sublime, a band that bottled the freedom of a California sunset and the ache of its shadows. But his story is also a cautionary tale, a reminder that talent can light up the world, but addiction can snuff it out. So next time you blast What I Got, see Bradley in your mind's eye, guitar in hand, Lou Dog at his side, singing his truth to a crowd that's still screaming his name nearly 30 years later. His flame burned out too soon, but its glow, that's eternal.